This is East Idaho Newsmakers with Nate Eaton.
Thanks for joining us today. We have Judge Gregory Moeller here with us. He is a current district judge, but that title will soon change as it was recently announced that he will now be serving on the Idaho Supreme Court. You're filling a vacancy from a retiring judge, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And you will be in this seat, which I just learned before we started taping, that this is not a lifetime appointment like many of us might think with the U.S. Supreme Court, but you're actually taking this seat and it's an elected seat.
That's correct. All positions above the level of magistrate in Idaho are elected positions, and so the Supreme Court's no different. The difference between district judge and Supreme Court is there are 4-year terms for the district judges. There are 6-year terms for the appellate judges in Idaho.
So you'll take Justice Horton's seat?
Yes.
And his seat expires in 2020?
That's right. So I'll be on the ballot in 2020 primary.
Okay, so we just kind of want to set the stage here. A lot of us are not familiar with the court system, which is probably a good thing. A lot of people don't know the difference between magistrate and district and supreme. And Judge Moeller has been good at working with the media and explaining how it works over the past few years. How does the system work here in Idaho?
Well, first of all, every state is a little different.
Yeah.
So when people come from a different state, they wonder, well, where's the Superior Court judge and where is the Circuit Court judges? And we have the equivalent of that in Idaho. We just call them different things. The Idaho judiciary is a unified judiciary, which means that they're all conducted under the auspices of the Idaho Supreme Court. And there's essentially 3 levels of judges. There's the magistrate division, then there's the district judges, and then there's the appellate judges, which consist of the Idaho Supreme Court, which is 5 sitting members, and then the Idaho Court of Appeals, which is 4 justices, but they sit in a 3-judge panel on every case. I've had an opportunity to do training of the media. That's been one of my responsibilities in the 7th District for the 9 years I was a judge. I know I've met with you and a lot of your staff over the years. And I saw a video that you did with Judge Watkins and Judge Mallard. And so I know they've explained that very well for your viewers. But essentially, there's the magistrate level, and magistrates preside over civil cases where the amount in controversy is under $10,000. They also preside over divorces and adoptions, child custody matters, probate matters with an unlimited maximum amount involved. They preside over criminal cases such as infractions. An infraction is a crime for which there's typically no jail time, just a fine. Misdemeanors, those are crimes where the maximum punishment is up to 1 year in jail and a $1,000 fine. And they also preside over juvenile cases. District judges preside throughout the judicial district. So whereas a magistrate will typically preside in their own county, sometimes being assigned to other counties, as a district judge I preside in multiple counties, up to the 10 in our district, in fact. Currently my resident chambers are in Madison County. But I also serve as the main district judge in Fremont County and Teton County. I have a regular docket in Bonneville County and in Jefferson County. And occasionally I hear cases up in Lemhi County. When I'm in Lemhi or Custer County, sometimes I'm closer to Boise than I am to Rexburg. So I, at one time or another, have had a case in all 10 counties in our district, and so I travel a lot. In other parts of the country, they sometimes refer to a judge that does what I do as a district judge as a circuit judge, but here they're called district judges. Then there's the appellate level judges. The Idaho Supreme Court basically hears appeals from the district court. And as a district court judge, going back to that for just a moment, my responsibilities are to cover civil cases where there's more than $10,000 in controversy, and then I also handle criminal cases that are felonies. Felonies are crimes where the maximum punishment is more than 1 year in prison and more than a $1,000 fine. So those are the kind of cases I handle. As a district judge, I'm also an intermediate appellate judge, which means I hear appeals from the magistrate division, or I hear an appeal from a local government decision. So for example, if the county commissioners authorize a zoning change and someone is aggrieved by that, then they can seek judicial review, and that first comes to the district judge. Now the higher level, the appellate judge that I mentioned a moment ago, they hear appeals from the district court. Occasionally they'll hear direct appeals from the magistrate division, and that's cases usually involving child custody. But for the most part, they hear district court appeals. And that's what their job is basically to make sure that the decisions were made legally and factually sound. They also, on rare occasions, can hear direct appeals when there are significant issues of statewide interest. A good example of that would be the recent appeal filed on Proposition 2, or the petition that was filed challenging Proposition 2. That was filed directly with the Idaho Supreme Court, and they'll be hearing that in January.
And so now your new position starting next year is you will be hearing appeals 100% of the time.
That's right, and that's going to be...
You're not going to be in a courtroom with a jury.
Yeah. What I do now, and what the district judges and the magistrate judges are in the state, are essentially trial judges. We preside over trials. Sometimes they're bench trials with just a judge. Sometimes they are jury trials. And that's been one of the funnest things I've enjoyed, frankly, as a judge, is being a trial judge. This will be very different. I won't be working with juries. I won't be working in trials where the evidence is typically where the evidence is produced. I'll be handling the appeal, which means that the trial's already over, a decision's already been made, and the role of an appellate judge is to review that decision to make sure it was done correctly.
So let's say the Idaho Supreme Court rules against a defendant, and the defendant believes that they've still been wronged. At that point, does it then elevate to the circuit, the Ninth Circuit, or once it's hit the Idaho Supreme Court, is that final? There
are a certain category of cases that once it goes to the Idaho Supreme Court, it would be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court directly. Okay. And such appeals are very rare. If you don't like a decision of the Idaho Supreme Court on a criminal case, there's other options. Typically that would include filing a petition for writ of habeas corpus in federal court. That's what we did in the Grube case.
Let's talk about the Grube case. This is how I actually met Judge Moeller years ago. You were an attorney at the time, and explain the case for those people that don't know.
Well, it's an interesting story, a story I've had an opportunity to tell a lot of times. And it's actually connected with my involvement in the book To Kill a Mockingbird, which you'd indicated you had some interest in too. Yes. So maybe
we should start there. Yeah.
So maybe if we start at the beginning.
Yeah.
I had the great opportunity when I was about in 10th grade to see the movie To Kill a Mockingbird. And there's a scene in that movie and in the book. I wish I'd read the book first because it's even better than the movie, but the movie is so true to the book. And there's a scene there when after the trial, and there's a very dramatic moment. The story is about a trial of a black man named Tom Robinson who's falsely accused of raping a white woman. He has a court-appointed attorney, happens to be probably the most honorable and best attorney in town, Atticus Finch. The story is told through the eyes of his 9-year-old daughter, Scout. And in that scene, at the end of the trial, in which Atticus had skillfully, I think, proved the innocence of his client, the all-white jury nonetheless found his client guilty. Everyone has left the courtroom except for Atticus, and he's doing that thing you always see attorneys do in movies, sticking his legal pads into his briefcase and snapping it shut, and he turns to leave the courtroom. And then all the good black folks that are sitting up in the balcony, not because those are the best seats, but because that's the segregated part of the courthouse, gradually rise as he turns to leave. And the minister that's sitting next to his daughter, and his children are sitting up there because there was no seats in the white-only section, doesn't stand. And so the minister looks at her and said, "You need to stand because your father's passing." When I saw that movie as a young 10th grader, sophomore, I felt a chill go up my spine. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise, and I knew at that moment I was going to be a lawyer. And also, in a very strange way, I had a very strong sensation that someday I'd have to defend a man that I believed was innocent in an important trial. So because of that experience, I was really focused towards being a lawyer. I majored in political science in college and ended up going to law school. And I'd been out of law school barely a year when I got court appointed to represent a young man named Roland Grube, along with my partner Mike Kam, who is now deceased. And I remember meeting with the young man. He was accused of a murder that occurred 8 years ago. It was a tragic shooting of a young 15-year-old girl while she was sleeping in her basement in Ashton. And my heart still to this day goes out to her parents. And 8 years later, they charged Mr. Grube. I remember meeting with him, and the first thing he said to us is, "I didn't do it, I didn't do it, I didn't do it." And after visiting with him for a few hours, my partner and I realized that we haven't had every attorney's biggest dream and worst nightmare on our hands, representing an innocent man in a murder trial. I can't begin to tell you what that experience felt like, to know that you had a person's life in your hands in that way. Anyway, the trial went through. There was lots of twists and turns. It's a very interesting story that I don't think I have time to tell you about today. I have told the story to a lot of law students and college students over the years, and be glad sometime to sit down with you and go into more detail about it. But at the end of the trial, he was convicted. And so we appealed it and lost the appeal. New evidence came out showing that the police had withheld important evidence that would have pointed towards his innocence, and showed that some of the evidence used at trial had been manufactured. And so we asked for a new trial and were denied. So we appealed that to the Idaho Supreme Court, and we lost the second time. But this time it was on a 3-2 decision with a very strong dissent written by Justice Kidwell. We had few options left, and so we had to go to federal court, and that's where we filed the petition for writ of habeas corpus that I mentioned later. The case went before Judge Lynn Windmill, who is a district judge, federal district judge, and co-counsel was appointed because my partner Mike Kam had died by that time, tragically. And so the public defender that worked with federal cases, his name was Dennis Benjamin, was appointed on the case, and I stayed on the case pro bono for about 5 years. And it took us about 5 years, but eventually we got a ruling from Judge Windmill concluding that he was denied a fair trial, and a new trial was ordered. That decision was immediately appealed by the state, and we went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the 3-judge panel there, during oral argument, basically said that encouraged the state to dismiss their appeal, or that they would be writing a decision that would make them not very happy. And so 5 days later, they dismissed the appeal. The case was scheduled for trial. The state later made us a deal that was so good that we couldn't take it. It resulted in all the charges eventually being dismissed within a couple months, and eventually all of the charges were dismissed against Mr. Gruby. And when it was done, he had no criminal record at all. Unfortunately, the story has a tragic ending 3 years after we got him out of prison. Bear in mind, he had spent 15 years in prison. 3 years after we got him out of prison, he tragically died of a stroke. He was in pretty bad health when he got out. When he went to prison, he was a year younger than me and looked a year younger than me. When he got out of prison, he looked 25, 30 years older than me. But at least he died with his family, and he died with his name cleared. Shortly after that, I was invited to give a speech. The Madison Public Library was doing a county-wide or library district-wide thing called the Big Read. I think they do something similar now, but they call it something different. What the Big Read was is they would, based upon a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, they would receive a whole bunch of books, like 1,000 copies of a book, and then they would pass it out throughout the community. Everybody would read it, and then they would have a month-long celebration of that book in which there would be speeches and panel discussions and showings of the movie. It happened that year. The book was To Kill a Mockingbird. And somebody had heard, probably from somebody in the media, that that book had a connection to me. It was the book, of course, that had encouraged me to go into law. And so I was invited to give the keynote address on the Big Read, and I gave a speech about the book To Kill a Mockingbird, how it had influenced me, and I drew a lot of parallels, because there are a lot of parallels between the book, the case in the book, and the murder case that I had been involved with for 15 years. Mr. Grube's brother, who was an Anglican minister in Nevada, asked for a copy of my speech, and I sent it to him. And then I should have brought it today. I don't know what I was thinking, but unbeknownst to me, he sent a copy of my speech to Harper Lee's publicist in New York, who advised him that she had recently had a stroke and wasn't doing well, but forwarded the speech to a close friend who happened to be a minister in Alabama, who visited her every week and would read to her, move her around the grounds in a wheelchair, sometimes have picnic lunches with her and such. He read my speech to her one day and sent me an email just telling me that and telling me how touched as she was by hearing how the book had influenced me to become a lawyer, and later I was able to handle a case similar to the one in the book. Then a few weeks later, perhaps the greatest gift anyone's ever given me came in the mail. I received a signed copy of the book, To Kill a Mockingbird, with a personal note to me from Harper Lee that she had written, and a letter from the minister saying that he saw her do it.
Which for her would be very rare.
Yeah, she was pretty much a recluse in her later years and made no public appearances, didn't sign anything, and if she ever did, she certainly wouldn't personalize it. But it was a very touching moment for me, and just imagine if Hollywood made a story of this, most people wouldn't believe it. I mean, here I was, a young man, inspired to become a lawyer by a book. And because of that book, I become a lawyer, and I get a case very much like one in the book, and end up having the trial with a similar outcome, but in the end we were able to exonerate our client. And then later I gave a speech about it, and the speech found its way into the hands of the person that wrote the book, and then she sent me a copy of the very same book.
Full circle moment.
Yeah, it's just a very special, somewhat miraculous occurrence in my life that it inspires me to this day, and I have an opportunity to share this story. I just shared with you so often, a little longer version, but I typically speak 2 or 3 times every semester at Madison High School to their 10th grade English literature classes who happen to be studying To Kill a Mockingbird like I was, and hopefully I may have inspired a few people to go into law.
Absolutely, and as far as the Hostner case, they still have not. No one's been arrested for her murder.
Well, yes, and again, this is kind of a controversial area, sure. But obviously there's some people that still think Mr. Grube did it, and other people think, it's unsolved case. I don't think there's any chance they're going to move forward with it.
Yeah, it's so old now. I do want to talk to you a minute about the media and courtroom access in Idaho. Some states where I used to work in Virginia, cameras were not allowed in any courtroom. I mean, it was very rare if you had a camera in a courtroom, and the judges in our part of the state have been very good working with the media. Sometimes you're able, as the public, to see footage from inside courtrooms, and you've kind of made that happen. What would you describe the relationship as a judge working with the media? A lot of judges can't comment about the cases, and I'm sure sometimes that drives you nuts.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there to respond to.
Yes.
First of all, in Idaho, whether or not cameras are allowed in the courtroom are up to the judge. Idaho Court Administrative Rule 45 governs the use of cameras in the courtroom, but the important thing is left up to the discretion of the judge. And most judges are pretty liberal about allowing the media to come in with cameras. You have to make a request 24 hours in advance. If there's going to be multiple cameras, sometimes we'll require you to do pool shooting of the courtroom. And there's some rules, of course. You're not supposed to show jurors or attempt to photograph the attorney's notes at the table, things like that. But for the most part, I think judges allow pretty good access to that. As far as other access to the judiciary, certainly the media can call with questions, and judges are encouraged, whenever possible, to try to work with the media. Sometimes, though, your questions are questions we can't answer. For example, if you ask a question about a procedural matter, like what's a rider mean, or what does it mean when someone has a 2-year fixed sentence and a 3-year indeterminate sentence, we can answer those kind of questions that are procedural in nature. If a question is asked, why did you send this person to prison, or which evidence, which exhibit that was presented at trial was the most influential to you, those kind of questions that deal with the substance of the case. Do you think he's really guilty? Those type of questions we can't answer. But I think the judges owe it to the media to have the courtesy of explaining when they can't answer something. But we also have a responsibility of the judicial system to make sure that we preserve a fair trial. Sometimes that can be difficult, and sometimes a judge might be misperceived as being hostile to the media. Often that may be because he's very mindful of the defendant's rights. And of course those rights have to be balanced, because the First Amendment obviously gives the press responsibility to cover the courts. One of my roles currently as a district judge is to train the new judges on how to work with the media. And one of the things I always explain to them is that don't be afraid of the media. We typically, when we're exposed to the light, look pretty good. My experience, for example, in working in jury trials has been that every juror, when the trial is over, comes out of it with a higher regard for the legal system. They see how hard the attorneys work, they're seeing how hard the judges are working, and they have a sense that justice was done. And my feeling is if we allow the media to have access to what happens in our courtrooms, and the public sees that, generally I think they're going to come out with the same conclusion. So I think we do some of our best work in the courtroom. Why should we be hiding that from the media? Now, it goes both ways. We want the media, if they're going to be there, to make sure they're accurate in what they're reporting. It's frustrating sometimes as a judge to sentence somebody and spend 30 minutes explaining my sentence and then have the media do a short sound bite without much explanation for what went behind it. There's typically hours of thought and consideration and pages of evidence that go into our decisions. And so I appreciate when the media is there, because typically if they're in the courtroom when I explain my sentence, the article they write will be much more accurate than if they just call the clerk up on the phone and say, "What did the judge give her?" So again, I think it's good to have the media there. We're public officials. We need to be held accountable. But I think if the light is shined on us, we typically look pretty good.
You are the first judge in nearly 30 years to serve on the Idaho Supreme Court from Eastern Idaho, the first judge from Eastern Idaho. A lot of people often feel like this part of the state's kind of ignored, you know, oh, Boise's over there. Kind of an honor to have somebody from here now kind of represent us, I guess. Can you say that? I mean, you're from here and...
I can understand why you might look at it that way. Once I begin my service on the Supreme Court, though, I'll be representing the entire state. Now, having said that, certainly my viewpoint and my experience is largely informed by having lived in Eastern Idaho for my entire professional career since 1990, having raised my family here, having run a small business here as an attorney, having raised children through our school system over here, and just all my experiences, even as a judge for the last 9+ years. You know, they inform who I am and how I look at things, but nevertheless, once I'm on the Supreme Court, I'll be representing the whole state. It'll give me an opportunity to understand some of the issues that inform their viewpoints of things. You know, frankly, there's no reason why a judge from Eastern Idaho should be able to read the Constitution and read it any differently than a judge from Northern Idaho or from the Treasure Valley or from the Magic Valley. The law is the law. And so my hope will be that although this is a pick from Eastern Idaho, my intent is to represent the entire state. It is good, though, to have some regional balance on the court. I think it adds to the legitimacy of the court, and I think having a variety of perspectives typically leads to better conclusions about things.
What will you miss about being here and serving as a district judge and living in Eastern Idaho?
Well, first of all, as a judge, I'm going to miss terribly my colleagues and the people that I work with, the people, all of the great clerks that I work with, the lawyers that I see on a routine basis. I'm going to miss presiding over a mental health court, and I just had that this morning, and just a lot of people who I've tried to help over the years, my neighbors and my friends, and as I mentioned, a lot of my colleagues from my experience as an attorney and now as a judge. It's going to be hard to leave them, and I'm going to miss them. Professionally, as a judge, I think I'm going to miss doing trials. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to try a case. I never feel more like a judge than when I'm handling a jury trial. One of my responsibilities on the new judge orientation faculty for the Supreme Court is I train all of the new judges in the state how to do jury trials. I've done that for about 4 or 5 years now, so that's been very, very gratifying. So I'll miss that. On a personal level, just whenever you live somewhere for almost 30 years, you have a lot of roots and a lot of connections, a lot of people that we love and care about, and it's going to be hard for my wife and I to leave them. But we're also excited. This is going to be a new adventure for us. We've raised our children. It's just the two of us. We're going to be moving into a new town. It's going to be like kind of being newlyweds again, although maybe not with quite as much poverty as when we were first married.
I have a little bit of money to go to the movies.
Maybe just a little bit.
Yeah. Is there anything that you want the public to know about the legal system, or about a question that maybe you wish you were asked that you haven't been asked?
Well, that's a question that requires probably more thought than I have time to give it.
Right.
That is a good question. Well, first of all, I think the public needs to know how conscientious the people are that work in the court system are. These are good people, and to a person, I think every one of us have no political agenda. I think our only agenda is trying to get it right. And I think people need to understand that. I think they need to understand that there's a reason for most of the things we do, and typically we explain what that reason is, even if it doesn't always get reported in the media. And like all systems that are designed by man, it's not a perfect system. Sometimes mistakes are made. But the beauty of the system is there is a way to fix those mistakes most of the time. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes 15 years, but there is a way to fix those mistakes.
Judge Moeller, thank you very much. Judge Gregory Moeller, the newest Idaho Supreme Court Justice, being sworn in at the beginning of the year?
It's anticipated it'll be during the first week of January we'll be sworn in.
And he will be moving to Boise, and you'll probably maybe hear a lot more from him, or maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Yeah, I'm going to be one of 5 now instead of on my own. So yeah, I'm not sure if you'll hear as much from me, but I'm not falling off the face of the earth. I'm going to be very busy.
Well, and one of the things that I assume they'll continue is the Supreme Court will often travel through different parts of the state and hear cases, or at least present them, right? I mean, they've done it at BYU Idaho and ISU. And
right, routinely they'll travel throughout the state. I know they go up to northern Idaho and they appear at the University of Idaho at the law school there, and they've come to BYU Idaho and they've come to Idaho Falls before, and throughout the state. And so I'm going to be looking forward to that. And trust me, as I said before, it's not my intent to fall off the face of the earth. Any opportunity I have to come back, if I'm invited, I likely will take advantage of that. I don't want to make myself scarce from eastern Idaho. I know where my roots are, and I'm going to need to return to them regularly.
Great. Well, we'll see you around. Thank you, Judge Moeller, and thank you for watching. Have a good week.